When the Neon concept car was shown to the public in 1991, many were skeptical that this car would live up to the promises of a powerful, fuel-efficient, roomy, yet competitively priced car. Well, here it is, just 3 years later, and the new Dodge and Plymouth Neon has all of those features and more. Hi, I'm Greg.
And I'm Mike. In this edition of Mastertech, we'll introduce you to the new systems and components used on the Neon. Specifically, we'll look at the new 2-liter engine and its ignition, fuel, and emission systems, as well as the Neon's new 5-speed manual transaxle, its chassis components, restraint systems, body electrical components, and its climate control system. We'll start with the Neon's exciting new engine.
The Neon was able to live up to the performance goals of the concept car because of its new engine. This engine is a 2-liter, single overhead cam, 16-valve, 4-cylinder engine. With a 9.8-to-1 compression ratio, the engine produces 132 horsepower at 6,000 RPM and 129 pound-feet of torque at 5,000 RPM. Very respectable figures for a car that returns 28 miles per gallon in the city and 37 on the highway when equipped with a manual transaxle.
And the design of the engine is just as impressive. From the start, the goal was to design a world-class engine in regard to noise, vibration, and harshness. As you can see on this disassembled engine, the block is actually a 2-piece cast iron design. The second piece is this bed plate here. The bed plate adds strength and reduces vibration because it ties all the main bearings together. To gain access to the 5 main bearings, you'll need to remove the bed plate, since the bearing caps are incorporated into the bed plate itself. Sealing the joint between the bed plate and the block requires a new anaerobic sealer, which is greenish-blue in appearance. Only this new sealer can be used. Nothing else will work. Check this month's reference book for the part number. From the top, the block probably looks a little unusual to most of you. This is due to the semi-open deck design. This design minimizes cylinder bore distortion when the head is torqued to the block. The pistons are marked on top with an L or H to designate whether the piston is light or heavy. The L or H also indicates the edge of the piston that faces forward when they're being installed. Besides the light or heavy pistons used at the factory, a service piston is also available. The weight difference of the service piston is nominal, so it will not cause adverse effects if only one piston is replaced, leaving all the remaining pistons heavy or light. The connecting rods are forged as one piece from powdered metal. They are then laser scribed and fractured. This process is totally different than past designs, and it allows for greater control over weight during the forging process. The rod cap bolts are the torque-to-yield kind and must be replaced if removed. The piston, pin, and connecting rod are a unit and must be replaced as an assembly. Now we'll move over to Greg and his more completely assembled engine.
This engine's crankshaft has a press-on vibration damper. It uses no key, and since the damper is retained by a 6,000-pound press fit, special tools are needed for its removal and installation. The head of the engine is a cross-flow design with the intake manifold at the front and the exhaust manifold at the rear. The combustion chambers are of the pent roof design to accommodate the 4 valves per cylinder. With the cylinder head cover removed, you can see that the aluminum head has a single plane machined top surface for good sealing. The engine uses one Y-shaped rocker arm for each cylinder's 2 exhaust valves. The rocker arm operates off of one cam lobe. The intake valves have a rocker arm for each valve and use 1 cam each. These roller rocker arms contain internal hydraulic lash adjusters.
The valve stem seals are integral with the guides. Snap-on tool number YA8230 is used to remove them. The camshaft used on this engine has 5 bearing journals. The journals are different diameters for ease of assembly.
The camshaft position sensor reads a magnet on the rear of the camshaft. This sensor is also used as a camshaft thrust plate. To check the valve timing, there is a hole on the outer timing belt cover to inspect the timing mark on the camshaft sprocket. The hole is sealed by a rubber plug. The timing belt that drives the camshaft also drives the water pump. The timing belt uses an automatic spring-loaded belt tensioner that is hydraulically dampened. An important service note about this engine is that, unlike previous corporate four-cylinders, this engine has no broken timing belt valve clearance. It is therefore very important that you do not rotate the engine if the belt is off, since the pistons will contact any open valves.
It is also important to replace the timing belt at the proper interval. That interval is every 105,000 miles for Schedule A general service and every 102,000 miles for Schedule B severe service.
Another interesting feature of this engine is the use of an oil separator that is mounted on the intake side of the engine. The separator helps prevent excessive oil from being pulled up through the PCV system and into the intake manifold. This is accomplished by routing the PCV airflow through baffles that slow or restrict the oil flow. For more on the oil separator, let's go to Mike.
To prevent oil from even getting as far as the separator, the crankcase contains a baffle. The baffle can clearly be seen with the oil pan off. It's attached by 3 bed plate bolts.
As for the intake manifold, it's made out of a strong yet lightweight composite. It's held in place by screw and washer assemblies that must be replaced once they're removed. Proper installation and torquing of fasteners is critical. To the left of the intake manifold, the thermostat housing is made of plastic. The thermostat has an air bleed known as a jiggle pin on the flange. The water pump inlet elbow is also plastic. Now, Mike will show us more on the lower end of the engine.
Like this single plain oil pan gasket. This one-piece gasket is reusable. In fact, the gaskets for the intake manifold, throttle body, and cylinder head cover are all reusable. Do you remember we said earlier that a new kind of anaerobic sealer is used to seal the bed plate? Well, make sure you wipe off any excess sealer before installing the oil pump. The oil pump to block surface uses Loctite 518. Be careful that Loctite 518 and the other new anaerobic sealer don't come into contact with RTV. If mixed with RTV, neither the anaerobic nor the RTV sealers will cure. The only place on this engine where RTV is used is on the oil pan mounting flange, where the oil pump, oil pan, and bed plate meet. Make sure that there is no excess RTV here either. RTV can rob oil of its anti-foaming agent. Speaking of oil, the oil capacity of the engine is 4.5 quarts with a filter change, 4 quarts without. 5W30 is the recommended grade. If you need to remove the engine from a Neon, the recommended procedure is to lower the engine through the underside of the car using the engine support dolly, number 6135, and the engine support cradle, number 6710. The cradle is new for the Neon, but it will work on any front-wheel drive car. Some of you may be familiar with the dolly already, since it was used on the Premier and Monaco. The engine uses 3 engine mounts. The engine mount at the front of the engine is unique because the engine mount bracket mounts over an opening in the timing belt cover. The manual transaxle also uses a shock-type bobble strut in addition to the 3 engine mounts. It's time for our first review question. These questions now appear in the front of the reference book, so open it up. You may want to pause the tape to give you time to answer the question. What is the interval for changing the timing belt for Schedule A general service? A, 55,000 miles, B, 65,000 miles, or C, 105,000 miles? The answer is C. The timing belt should be changed every 105,000 miles for Schedule A general service. This service interval is important because the engine has no broken timing belt valve clearance.
The ignition system on this engine is an electronic ignition system. It's similar in operation to the systems with which you're already familiar. The coil pack is on top of the engine. It contains two independent coils, one for each pair of cylinders. The coil towers are labeled with the cylinder numbers that each coil serves. Each coil fires a spark plug on one cylinder's compression stroke and on the other's exhaust stroke. The Hall effect crankshaft position sensor is just above the oil filter on the right side of the block. The sensor reads the timing notches on the second crankshaft counterweight. The camshaft position sensor that we've already mentioned is mounted on the rear of the head. As with the ignition system, the fuel system is similar to the systems you're familiar with. This sequential multi-port fuel injection system does have some slightly different parts, though. The big change is a new powertrain control module. It's located on the driver's side of the engine compartment, attached to the inner fender. It's smaller than other versions. The PCM also has no vents for air cooling. Instead, the case is ribbed for convection cooling. The other big change with the PCM can't be seen from outside. That's because the change is in the diagnostic software.
That's right. In the past few months on Mastertech, we've told you about the new onboard diagnostics called OBD2. Well, Neon's PCM contains the new OBD2 software. We'll discuss this in depth when we tell you about the emission system. Another feature of the Neon's fuel system is that it's a returnless system. The pressure regulating valve is at the fuel pump module in the fuel tank. As a result, fuel pressure is constantly maintained at 49 psi. The fuel filter is housed outside the fuel tank for serviceability. The fittings are the quick connect kind. This unique filter directs fuel to the engine and also to the pressure regulator. Now Greg will finish up the details on the fuel system.
The fuel injectors used for the automatic transaxle vehicles are different than those used with the manual transaxle vehicles. You can tell the difference because the injectors used on the manual transaxle vehicles are thinner. These two injectors are not interchangeable. Another item that is different is the throttle body. On auto-trans vehicles, the throttle body has a straight bore. On manual trans vehicles, the throttle body has a tapered bore to reduce bucking at light throttle applications. Also different are the throttle body cams. The auto-trans vehicles have a straight cam, while the manual trans vehicles have an off-center cam to provide graduated operation of the throttle blade with moderate pedal movement at tip-in. As Mike mentioned earlier, this vehicle meets the OBD2 requirements that we've told you about several times here on Mastertech. The Neon is the first Chrysler-built vehicle to meet these standards. The check engine light will now be triggered to warn that the vehicle is not meeting emission standards. An engine misfire or an inefficient catalytic converter are two such instances. To measure the catalyst efficiency, a second oxygen sensor has been placed downstream of the converter. Both this sensor and the upstream oxygen sensor mounted in the exhaust manifold are heated. To detect engine misfire, the PCM keeps an eye on the crankshaft position signal and triggers the check engine light when the variations exceed a predetermined value. If the check engine light flashes, this means that the PCM detects a misfire severe enough to damage the catalytic converter and the car should not be driven. Also required by the OBD2 regulations is a generic data link connector that is the same industry-wide. This new 16-way connector is located under the instrument panel below the steering column. It's compatible with the new DRB3 scan tool. This only touches on the OBD2 requirements. We will have much more information on this subject in the January '94 Mastertech when we cover the DRB3 and the OBD2 regulations in depth. But now, here's another review question, so get out your reference books. What does a flashing check engine light signify? A, an EGR malfunction, B, a severe engine misfire, or C, an inefficient catalytic converter? The answer is B. With the new OBD2 diagnostics,
a flashing check engine light warns of an engine misfire severe enough to damage the catalytic converter.
There are two transaxles available on the Neon. The automatic transaxle is the 31TH that you should already be familiar with. The manual transaxle, however, is all new. The A578 is a 5-speed constant mesh design transaxle with a torque capacity of 140 pound-feet. The transaxle has a 2-piece aluminum case, and it weighs a comparatively light 82 pounds. The 5-speed uses anaerobic sealer all around the case, except where it meets the steel rear cover. Here, RTV is used. The shifter is connected to 2 cables. One cable is connected to the shift selector shaft, and the other connects to the crossover shaft. The shift selector shaft controls shifts between first and second, third and fourth, and fifth and reverse. The crossover shaft controls side-to-side shifts, that is, shifts between second and third and fourth and fifth. The adjustment for the crossover cable is contained in the shifter housing. Refer to the service manual for the proper adjustment procedure. Here are the transaxle vent and the backup light switch. Just below the backup light switch is the ID tag. This barcoded tag contains the transaxle model, assembly part number, and build date. In the event this stick-on tag were to come off, a metal ID tag containing the same information is attached to the rear bearing cover. The drain plug is located on the rear of the housing. The rubber fill plug is on the other side of the transaxle. The capacity is 2.1 quarts of Mopar manual transmission fluid. When the transaxle is properly filled, the level should be 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch below the fill plug. The Neon also uses a clutch starter interlock system. This consists of a switch that prevents the car from starting with the clutch disc engaged. This switch is not adjustable. The clutch cable runs from the pedal to the release lever on the top of the transaxle. This cable is self-adjusting. After this review question, we'll look at the chassis components of the Neon. What kind of sealer is used on the transaxle rear cover to rear case housing joint? A. RTV sealer. B. Loctite 518 anaerobic sealer. Or C. Any anaerobic sealer. The answer is A. RTV is used where the rear cover and the rear case housing meet. All other transaxle case joints use anaerobic sealer.
The suspension on the Neon comes in 3 different packages: touring, ride-tuned, and performance-tuned. All 3 suspensions are fully independent strut type at all 4 wheels. The front suspension uses a McPherson strut with urethane jounce bumpers. Both the steering knuckle and the lower control arm are one-piece cast components. The front suspension crossmember is removable. A sway bar is used on the touring and performance-tuned suspensions. Caster and camber are fixed. No adjustments are necessary. Now, Mike will tell us about the rear suspension.
The rear link-type suspension of the Neon is similar in design to the Concorde, Intrepid, and Vision rear suspension, but the components are different. Chapman struts are used on the rear. Chapman struts are simply struts that don't turn. The rear suspension uses lateral lower suspension links, 2 on each side. One of the links contains a cam bolt for adjusting toe. The rear crossmember that these links attach to is part of the body structure. The suspension also has 1 longitudinal link per side. On the vehicles equipped with a performance-tuned suspension, a linked sway bar is used. This rear suspension design helps handling, but so does the cab-forward design of the car. By having the wheels closer to the edges, the car is much more stable. Of course, an extra benefit of this design is the increased interior room.
The Neon has a surprising amount of room for a car of its external size.
Also important to handling is the steering system. Standard on the base Neon is a manual rack and pinion system. A power rack and pinion system is optional on the base and standard on the Highline and the upcoming Sport model. Let's take a look under the hood. The power steering reservoir is separate from the pump. The reservoir is located on the passenger side of the engine compartment behind the cylinder head. The power steering system uses a pressure switch that sends a signal to the PCM to increase idle to compensate for load. As for the steering gear, it must be serviced as a unit. Since Mike still has the car on the hoist, let's look at the braking system.
The brakes on the Neon are front disc, rear drum power brakes. A four-wheel disc brake system will be available later in the year. This system will have a different master cylinder that is not interchangeable with the disc drum master cylinder. Now, it shouldn't surprise you that anti-lock brakes are available for the Neon. What is different, though, is that ABS will be optional on not only the upcoming four-wheel disc system, but also on the disc drum system. This anti-lock system, known as ABX4, should not be confused with the anti-lock 4 system we mentioned in the September New Model Highlights program. While their basic operation is similar, the components are completely different. Bleeding this system is different than the anti-lock 4 system, so be sure to consult the service manual. We'll discuss all this in depth in the February '94 release. But for right now, let's quiz you on the chassis components. Which is found on the Neon's rear suspension? A solid axle. B, no toe adjustment. Or C, a crossmember that is part of the body structure. The answer is C. The rear crossmember is part of the body structure.
Safety is another strong point with the Neon. All Neons come standard with a driver and a passenger airbag. Now, this dual airbag system is another system that is similar to the successful Concorde, Intrepid, and Vision models. Like that system, the Neon uses two front impact sensors. They're located on either side of the radiator closure panel. In addition to the two front sensors, there is also a safing sensor in the airbag control module. The control module is located under the center console between the shifter and the parking brake. The airbags are inflated by conventional solid chemical devices. They also contain two vents in the back for deflation. The airbag system uses two dedicated fuses that are located in the fuse panel. You will notice them by their border. To diagnose the airbag system, the DRB3 scan tool, or MDS, is connected to the 16-way data link connector we mentioned earlier. There is no separate airbag module diagnostic connector. And remember, before working on this airbag system, always allow 2 minutes to elapse between the time you disconnect and isolate the negative battery cable and the time you begin work on the system. Now let's go back to Mike for information on the seat belts.
The front seat belts used on the Neon are height adjustable for maximum comfort. In addition to this, the front inboard restraining buckles travel with the seat. And now it's time for the review question on the Neon's restraint systems, so open up that reference book. How long should you wait between disconnecting the negative battery cable and beginning work on the airbag system? A, a minute. B, a minute and 30 seconds. Or C, 2 minutes. The answer is C. Wait 2 minutes before beginning work on the Neon's airbag system to prevent accidental inflation.
Like other Chrysler Corporation vehicles, the Neon has a power distribution center in the engine compartment. On the Neon, the PDC is located on the driver's side behind the battery. The PDC contains the maxi fuses, battery fuses, and relays for all underhood power equipment, as well as the horn relay. It also contains the ignition off-draw fuse that is held in place with a snap-in retainer. The Neon's fuse panel is located on the end of the instrument panel. The inside of the cover contains a diagram of fuse locations and sizes. The fuse panel contains the time delay relay and the combo flasher.
The wiper stalk is on the right side of the steering column, opposite from what you're used to. Inside this stalk is the intermittent wiper relay, the intermittent wiper logic circuit, and relay control circuit, as well as the printed circuit board on which the components are mounted. On the left side of the steering column, the turn signal stalk still operates the high beams, but instead of pulling it back, you push it forward. For the optical horn, the stalk is pulled rearward. The hazard light switch is different from what you're used to. Instead of a spring-loaded push button, the Neon uses a sliding switch. The instrument cluster has microprocessor-driven magnetic-type gauges. The odometer and trip odometer are driven by a small stepper motor. The chime unit is integral with the cluster. The instrument cluster itself has self-aligning connectors, like on the Concorde, Intrepid, and Vision, to make installation easier. Now let's look at the Neon's wiring. The doors have sub-harnesses because of the Neon's door-off assembly process.
The connector between the main engine harness and headlight and instrument panel harness is a new design. The 42-way connector is found behind the PDC. Now, speaking of headlights, the oval plastic Aero-style headlights use a removable halogen bulb. Shielded vents on the bottom and top help prevent moisture buildup while keeping out rain and road splash. The headlight adjustment screws are accessed with the hood open. The taillights use one bulb for stoplight, turn signal, and taillight. A separate bulb is used for the backup light. The bulbs are accessed from inside the trunk. Removing the housing from the outside will break the seal and could cause a leak. And here's another review question. How are the Neon's high beam headlights activated? A, by pulling back on the turn signal stalk, B, by pushing forward on the turn signal stalk, or C, by pressing the switch on the floor? The answer is B. Pushing the turn signal stalk forward activates the high beams. The climate control system on the Neon has some features that you will need to be aware of. One such item is that the air conditioning system on the Neon is factory installed only. There are no kits for dealer installation. As you probably guessed, the system uses R134A refrigerant. The 10-piston compressor uses ND8 PAG oil and has a capacity of 4.75 ounces. This system uses an expansion valve that also has high and low pressure cutout switches. To protect the evaporator from freezing, the system uses a cycling clutch switch located in the evaporator fins. The switch sends temperature indications to the PCM. The PCM can then turn the compressor clutch on and off as necessary. Let's now look at some of the climate control components on the inside of the car.
The interior controls are different than those previously used on domestic Chrysler Corporation vehicles. The controls are cable, not vacuum operated. The air conditioning and the heating and ventilation systems use rotary controls. On AC-equipped vehicles, the fan control is turned to the left to switch on the air conditioning. The fan knob is turned to the right when using the heater or vent. Changing the cables for the blend air and mode doors is relatively simple. The whole package does not have to be removed from the vehicle to accomplish this.
In fact, all cable replacement and adjustments are done at the HVAC control head. As you've probably guessed by now, none of the controls are vacuum operated. The fan motor is also quite easy to change. It can be removed by releasing a tab and rotating the motor on the heater-only cars. On AC-equipped cars, 3 screws hold the motor in place. Now for our last review question. How do the Neon's climate control switches operate the blend air and mode doors? A, by vacuum, B, by cable, or C, by electronics? The answer is B. The doors are cable operated. and all cable adjustments are done at the control head. Well, you've been introduced to the Neon's new single overhead cam 16-valve engine and its ignition, fuel, and emission systems. You've also seen the Neon's new 5-speed manual transaxle, its chassis components, restraint systems, body electrical components, and its climate control system. A lot of new customers will be attracted to the Neon, demanding customers, expecting the best.
By providing a high level of professionalism and customer satisfaction, they could well become repeat customers. We'll see you next month.